During my first year at divinity school, all of us first years had to take a course together. I do not remember what this course was called, but it was designed to get us all on the same page about ministerial preparation. I was there in that 3-year graduate program to pursue parish ministry. I had thought probably since the time I was in high school that this might be a path I would head down. And so after 1 year of living in Texas, after college ended, I found myself back in school. And there I was sitting among perhaps 4 dozen other students of all ages, all backgrounds, all religions, all thinking that their future might involve ordained clergyhood. One of the professors was walking us through the syllabus, and he got to a particular book on the syllabus, and it's a book titled The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich. And he asked if any of us had read it. And I think I was the only person in the room who raised my hand because I had read it as a religion major in college. And then he asked me something, and for the life of me, I cannot remember what he asked. But my answer was, it's why I'm here. I told this room full of people that book was why I was in divinity school, and that was like not entirely true, right? There were lots of reasons that I had gone down this path, and I will share those whenever you want me to, but it was true that this one book had a particularly, I'm gonna say maybe outsized impact on me. Paul Tillich was a German-American philosopher, theologian, and professor. He had criticized the Nazi regime and his work was on banned lists and his books were being burned. And he found himself fleeing to America as World War II came on. He got here and he taught at Union Theological Seminary and then at Harvard Divinity School and then later at the University of Chicago Divinity School. In an essay posted on aeon.com, one of his grandchildren wrote that, quote, Tillich considered himself a boundary thinker between philosophy and theology, religion and culture, the old world and the new. His interdisciplinary thinking encompassed the enormous social, political, technological, and intellectual change and conflict through which he lived. Indeed, Tillich was born in 1886 and lived until 1965. And he witnessed a great deal of change and turmoil in the world. It helped me contextualize this a little bit when I thought about the fact that that means he was born just 20 years, give or take, after the Civil War ended, and he lived to see the Voting Rights Act signed into law. Like that is a big change, right? He was the child of a Lutheran pastor, but he ultimately rejected conservative religion and clarified his own theology through a large body of academic, religious, and philosophical work. Now, Tillich's theology depends on 2 primary definitions, one of faith and one of God. As his grandson again put it, Tillich considered faith not a belief in the unbelievable, but the state of being grasped by an ultimate concern. And he conceived of God not as a being, but as the ground of being. Now, I like those, right? Faith not as believing in something that seems beyond belief, but rather faith as turning oneself toward the ultimate concerns of human living. And then God not as a being bound to existence as we humans are, but rather a symbol that we can only speak of in the abstract, that exists somehow beyond what is known by us. So Tillich spoke of this idea of the God beyond God, the idea that once we let go of some particular religious theistic notion of God, we make space for the God that is the ground of all being, or said slightly differently, the God that is within human living. His theology led others to accuse him of atheism and heresies. And it's true that while his works are filled with the word God, they are absolutely consistent with humanism. You can read them as an atheist and not feel a kind of way. So in the particular book, The Courage to Be, Tillich articulates his understanding of being. And the idea, as clearly as I am able to restate it in this moment, is that human existence, being with like a big capital B, encompasses both little b being and non-being. So we humans experience anxiety and fear because of the threat of our non-being, the threat of death, but also because of the threat of meaninglessness. And what he says is, our very being, big B being, is what leads us to feel those fears, right? In other words, non-being and meaninglessness are part of what it means to be. They're part of living. And so the courage that he refers to, the courage to be, is our courage in continuing to live in the face of the fears that are part of living, our participation in creation, in life itself, our continued being, he says, is an act of courage. It is what he calls self-affirming oneself. So living our human lives, caring about the world and one another, the meaning of it all, that is an expression of, an act of courage. And through this courageous act of living, Tillich says, we then find meaning. We find being. And when we live anyway, in spite of what scares us, when we accept the possibility of meaninglessness, we are in fact right there doing something meaningful, creating meaning in our lives. We are pulling meaninglessness into ourselves, and that creates the meaning that triumphs over the meaninglessness. Are you with me? Okay, Tillich was a philosopher, a theologian, a professor, the author of many books, and sometimes his writing is obscure and abstract and a little bit circular. But this concept of being, bringing into its wholeness the awareness of non-being, has always struck me. And this concept that the very act of accepting meaninglessness creates meaning has always offered me another way to understand not only life and our living of it, but also the courage that he talks about, and by extension, hope. There's that definition of insanity, which perhaps you've heard, that like insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, right? Yet here we have Tillich saying that continuing to live in spite of knowing the outcome, right, in spite of knowing that we will eventually die, he's saying that's courage, not insanity, right? In this case, the ultimate outcome never changes, but within a life, there is so much opportunity. There is so much power, so much potential, and that's the difference, right? The difference is that we aren't actually doing the same thing over and over. When we have the courage to be, we then also get to choose how we want to be. And when we get to bring that fear and meaningless inside ourselves and live and act from a place of hope, there's no nihilism here. We're expressing our hope not that our ultimate end will change, but hope that in our living, in our choices, there is indeed meaning. Something lasting, something real, something important. Tillich also at times gave sermons, and in the way of a preacher, they were like somewhat more clear than his lengthy writings. The year he died, he delivered a sermon at the Memorial Church at Harvard University, and it was titled, "The Right to Hope." And it asked the question, as he put it, do we have a right to hope? Is there justified hope for each of us? For nations and movements, for all life, for the whole universe? That was the question of this sermon. And in that sermon, he declared, quote, "Nobody can live without hope, even if it were only for the smallest things which give some satisfaction under the worst of conditions, even in poverty, sickness, and social failure. Without hope, the tension of our life toward the future would vanish, and with it, life itself. Hope is necessary," he declares, "or we would just give up. There is, though," he preaches, "a difference between foolish hope and genuine hope. That difference is the existence of the beginning of the thing." I promise I'm going to explain. Meaning, to hope for something that bears zero resemblance to the current state of affairs is foolish, whereas to hope for something that we might actually have the potential to realize is genuine. Okay, so for example, For me to wish and hope to be a 6-foot-tall Olympic volleyball player is a foolish hope, right? It's not going to happen. I could try all I want. It's not going to happen. For me to wish to broaden the reach of my words or raise my children into decent humans, that's a genuine hope. Tillich compares it to a seed or to a child. He says, quote, "In the seed of a tree, stem and leaves are already present, and this gives us the right to sow the seed in hope for the fruit. We have no assurance that it will develop, but our hope is genuine. There is a presence, a beginning of what is hoped for," he says, "and so it is with the child and or hope for his maturing. We hope because maturing has already begun, but we don't know how far it will go. We hope for the fulfillment of our work, often against hope," he says, "because it is already in us as vision and driving force." When we decide to live into these human existences with all their struggles and triumphs, we decide to be courageous, and I think we decide implicitly to hope. Our courage to be is an act of hope as well. A recognition that our very lives contain the beginning promise of something: change, fulfillment, joy, wholeness. Each of our unique and different lives is filled with potential, and our courageous living is hoping. I think they're the same thing. Our living is an expression of genuine hope for ourselves, for the world, for all that is. When we despair, when we begin to let anxiety over our finitude or over the potential meaninglessness of all things take over, we have to marshal our courage, which also involves leaning into our hope for change, for the future, for possibility. Hope is vital to our living and to our choices. And it is an act and a choice unto itself. It is a little circular. We can choose hope. We do choose it, even when we don't feel actively hopeful. I think we choose it implicitly by continuing to live fully and openly and courageously. Now, I have used here before the phrase active hope, and I think it's connected to that notion of genuine hope. When what we hope for is attainable, our hope contains within itself not just imaginings, but an actual commitment to action. Action that might realize that thing we are hoping for. So fundamentally, our courage goes hand in hand with a hope that our lives have meaning and value, and that through our actions, through our hopeful choices about how to live and who to be, we can create more meaning and more value. I sat in that room almost 2 decades ago now, earnestly desiring to do something with my life that felt like it matched my interests and my abilities with what I perceived the world to need. And 2 decades later, my life and me are very different, right? I have grown in many ways in 2 decades, as we all do. And yet the desire to live a life of meaning and value has not changed, and I'm not sure that ever changes for any of us. Whether we are having children or choosing a profession or beginning and ending a project, starting a new friendship, joining a new community, we hope for, we seek meaning and value. Hope is our right, our obligation, our salvation, and I think we need to expand our understanding of how hope moves in our lives. Because I think what I want to say today is that we're embracing hope when we get up in the morning. Even if you're not feeling super great and hopeful, you're getting up, right? If you take a shower, cook a meal, clean the house, all of those are an expression of hope in their own way. We express hope when we call a friend or go for a walk or write a letter to the senator. Whatever you're up to, it is, by its very act of living, an act of hope. When we face what is hard, when we cry in our grief, when we celebrate in our joy, all of this is an expression of hope for the future. Hope grounds everything that we do and everything that we do here, from our social justice work to our care for one another to our Sunday morning gatherings. It is courageous hope, active hope that calls us into the greatest and highest forms of our own being, calls us into new ways of living.